respond to you. Given the controversiality of what happens in surrounding neighborhoods with these areas, I'm sensitive to the fact that it's not clear from the get-go about the footprint, because John and I were having, Liliana and I have had a conversation about this offline, because she sent us an email. John and I had a conversation about this. Given the appropriate concern and nervousness, I think makes a difference. I think E and Drew make a point. I think talking about the surrounding neighborhoods versus the footprint makes a difference in light of the ink and everything else discussions.
Okay. Well, what do you guys recommend? Do you want me to?
Whatever you do, don't mention gentrification.
I think we got that one.
That's question 22.
So,
AE.
okay, so I want to be really clear, though. I do feel that the National Western Center campus is a real footprint, and my understanding is the charge of CIG's placemaking is to work within the boundaries of that footprint, which is a concept and orientation and ownership that it's very important that we help the constituencies of the neighborhoods understand as something that is nested, in Steve Nally's words, within the neighborhoods, and which has to have a relationship to the neighborhoods. And I am very concerned that that is not reflected in this. And I think it's going backwards, in all honesty, and I will admit that I expect people that are hired to be the experts to come in and hear that music. And this feels tone deaf to me. And so it's a little bit alarming and frustrating to me because it doesn't have the thing that we've been trying to reinforce in it, and it's not what is there now versus what's, we have done the master plan, the borders, the land is being acquired, the place is being made, and it's not just the landmarks, and it's the dynamism in the public realm things that that Ann talks about, and I put some of that in the email. So I'm very concerned, and it's disappointing. I really am sorry I don't want to be negative, but this is so important. Every step of the way is an entry point or an exit point, and it's not sufficient to me to say, oh, once you read the questions, it'll be clear. That to me is substandard in terms of expecting what would come out of something like this. So I'm not sure what to say because it's out there now.
Well, I can pick up every single one of these hard copies, and we'll get them redone, and we'll make sure that we have that clarified in the language.
I just feel like
this has gone through several reviews, and so, but I'm happy. I want to get it right? So if you guys would, that is the will of this group. I'm more than happy to do that. I will take up every single one of these copies, and we'll.
Why don't you see what kind of feedback and contribution you get first, and if you still don't feel like you have the appropriate response back, and then put a different twist in it, and then distribute it again to see if you get additional feedback, because again, the message that's being sent there is it's not, to me, it's exclusive, it's inclusive, and these neighborhoods want to support what's going on right here, and I think just let it go with that, and then if you don't get what you need, come back and do a distribution in a way that is more friendlier context with the subject matter. Again, focusing on being inclusive, going to go together, working development to make this one of the world-class facilities, what everybody can do. That's my recommendation. That way you don't waste, the But obviously,
I hate wasting trees. They're already printed. But
I'm under your direction. So whatever this group decides is the appropriate way forward, I'm happy to support it.
Julie, I think if you just took out the words "the area surrounding,"
Okay. Yeah, I agree.
just take that out.
Yeah, just call the conference.
Because you're referring to the center, not the area.
Sure.
And this front page is very good. I like this front page. Not the survey itself, but the center.
Just the idea of what the study is, sure.
I think that sets the tone. We're trying to find.
lessons going forward. And it's not so much the number of reviews, but the breadth of the reviews. I think the NUCO staff and
So, Maria, how do you want to do? I'm looking for some direction. So, how would you like to move forward with this?
Well, I recognize what Armando is saying. I have to tell you, maybe I'm being overly sensitive, but I think appropriate language that's accurate is really important in this time and age.
Okay, that is fine. The online survey I can fix tomorrow. That's easy. because, you know, the people haven't even gone into it yet, so I get it. And then what I will do, I will work with Liz to get these distributed out to people. But if I could pick them up in the meantime, it sounds like we don't want this out.
Because this is the first set that you've handed out to anyone for
Nobody has
distribution.
seen this
They haven't
one.
seen this, so,
Correct.
So that's why, Armando, I think we need to,
Right.
from the get-go.
so now you can nip it in the
Get
bud.
it.
Make it more inviting, more stimulative, and especially if I'm, you know, as you know, the educational population or the attainment level of our residents' constituency, we're not talking about graduates, master's degree program and stuff like that, so a lot of these individuals to decipher all this, and I think we need to be real clear and, you know, using his principle, and so we get some really good, meaningful thought and feedback.
Well, if you guys are going to send those back around, I will grab them, and like I said, I'll work with Liz on the
Mind if we do hold on to
Write draft on the top and keep talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to distribute this, but the rest of the information, people read through and understand, and then when we get the other one, we can distribute that.
Okay.
If it leaks out, I know where you are.
We had a question.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's like a one-pager or some kind of information that like our community workers can look at to help, because what will happen at probably many of our organizations is this information will be done one-on-one. We will get the surveys out, but we may need some help. People don't know what the complex is.
Sure.
They don't know what
Sure.
land we're talking about. So if
Right.
there is some information that could go to us with this that shows a map very simplified in English and Spanish, then we can really help.
Absolutely, absolutely.
thank
There
you.
is, right now, the best resource, and I know this isn't accessible to everyone, is the website. The website provides all sorts of the maps and the history and all of that, and that is referenced in the survey. So that might be a good place to start, but then also we can look at other materials they would need. But
Julie,
that's, you know.
Marcy has a really good handout, one picture
Okay.
with the phase 1 and 2 map on the front, the buildings on the side,
Okay.
and then the goals on the back.
Okay,
So-
great, I'll talk to her about that,
All right.
absolutely.
So I have a question. I'm hearing this term complex, and when I saw this, I actually went to the nationalwesterncenter.com to see, did I miss some kind of change in the name of the project? And it's getting a little bit confusing. It's the National Western Center campus, the NWC, and I think, well, what is there, a subgroup of buildings? So can we get clear about that? I hope people don't think that's nitpicking, but I think that there is a way to help people get oriented to this, and some of it has to do with the precision. And the master plan is over at the Valdez Perry Library in hard copy, by the way. It would be great if we could get one of those bound copies that you guys have and get that over there. And so you can, you can go in there with that. But is there something that's the complex that I'm not aware of? That's
No.
Yeah,
what is that?
Current is the National Western Complex.
So what is
National Western Complex is what we're in today, okay? So that's a Western Stock Show Association brand for what they do, all right?
Okay.
So, and then we are the National Western Center, which is what we're promoting.
Okay,
So
so
that's
that's
the difference.
really unclear.
Yeah.
But just to
And
clarify
so-
for you though,
okay, well,
the
Jeff, I'll just finish this
WSSA
thought
is
that-
moving away from complex and we're integrating into National Western Center.
Okay, that's what I assume is the macro engagement and that which we're embracing. And that's explains some of the confusion here, because you're centered, when you wrote this, on the stock show, not the National Western Center campus, and that's what we've arrived at that. So so I see what you're doing. Yeah, I think we need to. I hope we can do this as the National Western Center campus.
And the campus is not part of the brand, it's just National Western Center.
Yeah.
There's no
Campus
campus.
comes and goes. It seems to be a.
No,
It was heavy in the master plan, but since the rebranding, it has left.
Yeah,
Is
there's
it
no,
off the website?
Yeah.
there's no
I don't know if
campus.
it's
I
off the
think,
website.
that's where I went.
There's no campus anymore, at least there shouldn't be. It's just National Western Center.
Authority's gonna have to just deal with this. But I think I understand why that sort of could maybe claustrophobic when I saw that, because it's not a holistic center of gravity on the way this is framed, so maybe, okay, go, back to the whatever agenda.
I mean, yeah, Paul's not here, and so, I mean, I don't want to speak for the rest of the board members of the WSSA, but I might just a little bit. I doubt there'd be any heartburn if the survey dropped the word complex and replaced it to center among those of us at the WSSA.
Right, okay.
timeline on this in terms of when it becomes available and then when you need responses by?
So we're looking to mid-January, it'll be open until about mid-January.
Okay, so I think it would be helpful somewhere on the paper copy to
give a deadline. Okay.
So that you're not getting a bunch back at the end of January or into February.
Sure, great. Any other thoughts, questions?
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The illustrious Eric Anderson with Historic Structures.
This is going to have to be entire.
All right, so I handed out a little sheet of paper. The last time we were here, we talked a little bit about a historic resources process. And what I wanted to do with you is share with you the outline that we are looking at for the process that we're going to go through to determine, I guess, the final determination of all the buildings on the campus. Okay? And so our historians from Mead and Hunt, as part of the program team, have done something called a Class 2 historic survey for every resource on the campus, whether it's historic or not. Every building and things like the rail corridor is a resource, the yards are a resource. So they have something called a 1403 or a 1405 form, which is a federal form that basically outlines all these components. It's about 400 pages. So it's a lot of stuff. And then to go with that, Jay and his team at Campus Placemaking are also doing research on the history to see how we pull that history in to be part of our cultural plan. All right? So what I'm going to talk about tonight is a piece of that cultural plan, and this is really focused on the buildings. And so I want to run through this outline with you, get your comments on it. We have not started on this process yet, but our goal is to, in the next CAC meetings, have an update so that by the February CAC meeting, we understand kind of the determination of all the buildings on campus, what we're going to do with them, how they fit, why they're important, why they're not, so that we have all that information to use so everyone knows, so we don't run into the issues that we're running into now in Brighton as we have to demo for Brighton. Okay? So the purpose of the process, we want to show the full historic documentation. We have a lot of stuff. We're not sure how we're going to make that available yet because it's a bunch of stuff, but we'll figure that out. We want to identify all the eligible structures. And eligible is eligible for the Denver Landmark Preservation Commission to be a Denver landmark. And in Denver, it's anything over 30 years. But then it's not just that. There are also other components through it. And Mark, you can help me if I miss this. I am not a historian. That add to that. We will make our determination from our information what we think is eligible. Now, when the buildings, if for instance they're going to be demolished, or if they're going to be demolished, the Landmark Preservation Commission has their own process to determine if it's eligible. And they may find, if we find it not eligible, they may find it eligible. So there's still flexibility as we go through that. And then we want to involve the stakeholders, you guys for sure. And then we also have our partners that we want to bring with this. And then we're going to meet with History Colorado, Historic Denver, and the Landmark Preservation Commission are all part of this process. In fact, we met Tuesday, Wednesday? I can't remember what it was.
One day this week.
To go through this and start on this. And we're going to meet again next week to kind of finalize this outline so we can get started on it. And then we want to bring back to everyone the process we're using for making those determinations and how we're dealing with all the historic buildings. Okay? So that's the process. So then we will do a summary of all the historic findings. And that's all the work to date. And then we will have internal discussions about eligibility and what would be eligible. And then we want to bring back a map to you to show all the eligible buildings on the campus so that you can get a feel for where they're at. There's a few on Brighton, there's some on Baldwin Court, which is a separate look at this. And then there's some back by Neorama and McConnell Welding. And of course, Tom Anthony's old house, the old Armor Admin building. There are a number of them scattered throughout the campus. So we want to map all that stuff. Yes?
Eric, in addition to mapping, are you taking photos?
We've got, oh my gosh, we have so much stuff. And I think the other thing we're talking about is we're going to put together it's a summary sheet. It's quite long because there's a lot of buildings, but a little thumbnail picture, the date it was constructed, whether it's eligible or not, why, you know, what it's some of the history, just kind of a one-pager, that'll be probably 10 pages by the time we're done, just so everyone can get a feel for the buildings, and then we'll all tie that to the map. So, and then so after we get the summary, then we're going to go through and we're do all coordination meetings with SHPO, Historic Denver, Landmark Preservation Commission, Stock Show, CSU, NUCO, and have a couple big workshops to talk through all these buildings, how they could be rolled into the campus, what possible uses could happen with them. You know, that's the other thing is, yeah, we'll save a building, but what's going to happen there? And without the authority on board right now, it's kind of, we have to guess, but it's still, we want to have that discussion. And then part of that, so we have the whole campus, but we also want to do a little focus on the Brighton Boulevard and the Baldwin buildings, because that is really the last piece of Elyria on this side, on the west side of Brighton that's still there. So we want to see, can those be reused, can they be moved or woven into the fabric of the new site? So then as we go through that, we'll develop a draft document, which will come back to everyone for review. And we'll give you probably 2 or 3 weeks to look at that. I'm guessing it's probably a 50-page document by the time we're done, just to go through all that. Get your comments back, and that document will look at the process, key findings, recommendations, mitigation strategies, summary of possible funding, because we've got to figure out how we pay for all these renovations and moves and all that kind of stuff, and that's what we're doing. We'll review that. Revise that document, and then that'll be part of our campus cultural plan. It's one part of our another chapter in that as we move forward with the campus placemaking. So, go ahead, David.
What about the old tunnel going from the old coast into the new one? I call it Dalton.
Yeah, that's on the list. Yeah, the whole horse or animal bridge, right?
I know when it was built before.
No, it's definitely. I think it's probably eligible. Would be my guess. It's certainly not in use now and can't be because of it's not ventilated correctly.
They don't use it to move goods back?
They know, the fire department has said that doesn't get used, and that hasn't been used for quite a while.
Well, I was going to say, did the 89 bond campaign created a different walkthrough?
Yeah, put it underneath, and so it was probably shortly after that.
That's the one that uses, yeah.
You name off all these different buildings, and they're peppered all throughout the entire site. I guess I'm struggling a little bit with, once you have these places designated, and you can't just go in there and tear it down to accommodate the layout of the overall site.
So the buildings have to work with the layout, okay? And so if the layout can be tweaked to keep an important building, we'll look at that.
Okay, so I guess, having said that, so do you have an actual layout of these grounds?
Yeah, Jason, I mean, these are the alternatives that we looked at last meeting, and I don't know if you were here or not.
No, I wasn't here.
Okay, so Jay is going to go through those as soon as I'm done.
Oh.
But not all the whole historic buildings are identified on those plans, just to let you know.
Okay.
But Eric, I want to clarify something. This still, you're doing your own assessment as to what you think is eligible, et cetera. This still doesn't, we still have the city's demolition ordinance.
Yes, the LPC process, you bet.
Well, it's really not landmark, it's the city's demolition process.
It's the demolition process, but it goes, Landmark Preservation
Right,
Commission
Landmark comes in, but.
is a review agency of
right,
that.
so that just everybody understands, even if it was not, even if it was not found to be of historic significance, if there is a demolition notice, you have to.
It still has to go through that
It still has to go
process,
through that
that's
process
correct.
where you have 21 days.
It gets posted.
And it gets posted, the building would get posted, and then anyone can, you have to pay, but you can file to have a review
That's
done.
correct.
But just to clarify that, if the Landmarks Preservation Commission staff does not determine it eligible, they do not have to post it.
Oh, okay.
They decide what they
that's
think.
right, 'cause
They
we
don't
didn't-
go on
we
what
didn't
this
post it in
survey
national
is,
paper.
but the Landmarks Preservation Commission staff gets, and the ones they determine have the potential to be eligible,
Yeah, that's true.
they have to post.
That's true, so they review first, and then if they find some significance, they post.
If they think
And then
it's
see
even
if somebody.
possibly eligible, the ones that are questionable, they always post. But
Right.
if it's if they're like, this was not eligible, there's no way it's gonna be eligible, they don't post those.
And just to put on another gray area there, just for the sake of preservation, the property at 4741 and 4747 Brighton is one that was posted. I did an initial intent to file, talk to John Olson about it. It's kind of informally been folded in as part of the conversation. Now, the landmark ruling period has passed. It is designated for demolition. There's sort of an informal understanding that it likely wouldn't be demolished before the stock show, just for practical purposes, so we have some time. And there's reasons to discuss why that particular property should it's going to be affected by the Brighton Boulevard construction. And then leading into, from that, I have a question regarding money I'd like you to address, because when you talk about financing and finding money, one of the things that I get a little confused about is we've got gazillions of dollars available for this project, but I kind of get the feeling like, oh, we have to find money to do this preservation. So my question is, our esteemed executive director just delivered a baseline that saved millions of dollars and knocked 3 years off the project. Why do we even need to worry about, I mean, when you say, is it a matter of we've got the budget from the National Western Center, from our various streams, can't we assign money to it? Is it like that? Or are you saying the city has to find more resources for moving these buildings or whatever?
I think we
clarify how that works.
Since Gretchen has left, I think Patrick, who led the whole baseline effort.
So the baseline.
Why don't you stand up?
The baseline is very specific down to the line item, and there are structures that were envisioned in the master plan and through the iterative process to date, like livestock exchange, the armor building, administration building, and those are planned for. Anything that is new that comes in, we will have to either reallocate money or find new money for it. So
that's the key word, reallocate. I want us to keep that on the table, because the impression that we have to develop more money from another source, to me, makes me uncomfortable for two reasons. One, because I think it's fair to reallocate toward the project, and two, I don't want us to be asking for more money from anywhere when we've got such a generous budget. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
So and I also want us to have some hope that maybe, I mean, there's two buildings that have that architecture in that little cluster there, that 4741 and 4747. They're the ones over on Baldwin, I think.
Yeah.
And it's an opportunity that, you know, so anyway, I hate for it to be either or.
Well, Eric's going to also point out that we also have to find a place for it.
Well, we know all of those things are true.
And
that's part of the creativity.
And
I get that.
The rail line is a tricky part of that, right? It's, you can't move the structures under the rail, so they kind of
there's a structure on the east side of the Burlington Northern, it's going to stay on the east side of the
So I assume all of those things are part of the process. We're just taking a little step to make sure we don't accidentally lose the opportunity to solve the problem and make it happen. That's all.
John?
Oh, sorry.
I have a question, and I need to make a disclosure here. A personally biased opinion, maybe Dave does as well. The livestock bridge crossing over the Platte River.
Mm-hmm. It's on the list.
Do you have any idea what that status is?
Well, it's definitely eligible, and I kind of put it in the same realm as the Armor Water Tower. They're also definitely eligible.
Yes.
Those are different kinds of structures. They're not buildings, but they're structures. We would, you know, currently in the budget, we do not have money for the sheep bridge. We would have to reallocate to figure that out. We would love to keep the sheep bridge.
Well,
but we have to go through a structural assessment. Oh, maybe the citizens don't, but that's.
No, I just, you know, that to me, that's part of the history.
Oh yeah.
And the cultural impact that that particular industry made on our neighborhoods for how many generations? Yeah. And it was a unifying factor because very few people really realize that.
Perfect timing, Annie. We're
talk
talking
about
historic.
economic opportunity and equal employment. We had it. You know, all different nationalities. You know, making the same money, doing the same work. You know, eons of time before it became popular, men, women, different cultural nationalities, that has a lot of significance.
I agree.
The tower and the bridge.
Yep, I agree.
You know, that bridge, that fed every packing house along the bike path. That's where they led the cattle and the sheep and where they had to go. And that was our ski ramp.
Yeah, I heard that. We need to get that in the cultural plan someplace.
There should be a kiosk with a video of oral history.
Some good beer parties up there too.
I won't put that in.
Was that your conflict of interest, the beer parties?
That's a cultural impact in the neighborhood.
You know, people don't realize, but back in the day, there was a packing house where the Polish worked, a packing house where the Italians worked, where the Germans worked. It was all their own nationalities. So you would go to work wherever, whatever nationality you were, and we all made the same money. And then the Hispanics, they got to go to work anywhere. You know, they worked at all of them.
What language did the sheep speak?
Wow. Anything else for Eric that's actually serious?
Quick thing on art in public places. There has been some, I don't know where this fits in if it's here, but there have been, over the years now that we've been doing this, there's been conversation about, are there things when demolition starts that could become parts, like something in a train crossing, things out of the, you know, that can be pieces that can become, how are those being itemized and how are they being listed out so we can see what that inventory is?
The other deliverable that Jay has, Jay's gonna be a really busy guy, is something called a catalog of historic elements. Okay. And so what we're gonna do is catalog all these things. You know, there's some just
before demolition, right?
Well, for instance, we know we're going to move the yards, okay? But there's some cool little things in the yard.
That's
there's a couple of concrete posts that, you know, there's only 2 of them. So like, of all these posts, why are these 2 concrete? You know, but it's that kind of stuff. So we want to have this catalog so that we can then look at that when we're doing design and say, how can we work this in? Or give it to an artist and say, how can that spur my mind to do an art piece about this place based on it?
I think that is reflective of the conversation that did occur from within this group. And I'm saying that specifically because I'm going to ring this bell constantly, whether it annoys the hell out of people or not, that a lot of these ideas that are coming back is reflected by the people that are hired to do the work, sprang out of a real creative group over the years. So I think that, I want to just put it in those terms, I think that's reflective of a professional firm coming in and picking up what this group has generated. And there was one last thing, there was a conversation when they were trying to figure out what the properties were about the surveying, and there was a rock that was the records, the historic records, where there's a rock.
Steve Nally told it there's a rock that has,
and those types of narratives, I think, are really fascinating and really show some of how the whole thing was organized. I'd hate to lose those.
All right, so if you guys take a look at this, if you have any comments, send them to Liz.
Eric, can you talk just a minute about how the Bright properties fit into this process? Because I'm not sure that they do. I just want everybody to understand how that all fits into the process.
I mean, we will look at the Brighton properties as we look at all the other ones. I mean, we're going to be doing this in the next couple of months.
Right, but it's a quicker,
But it is a much, we have to focus on those first because it's a much quicker time frame because we have to widen Brighton starting in February. Now, Annie, maybe you can, Annie Levitsky's here from Historic Denver.
Sorry.
I wonder, maybe you can give everybody an update on the 4701 building and the historic treasures assessment that you guys are doing?
Yeah, so sorry to be late. I had to go to another meeting first, and John Olson is usually here with you, but he will be helping manage that, and they're having the kickoff meeting first thing tomorrow morning at 4701. So the architects will get to go in, and the structural folks who are going to analyze the building. So that'll get started tomorrow, and then it'll move pretty quickly once they have that building access.
And it's been delayed a little because we had to do asbestos abatement first. And so now that that's done, they can get in there and take a look.
Yeah, so I think we still hope to have a draft report in early January, sort of by the 2nd or 3rd week of January.
Anyone else? Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Jay, site plan.
I apologize that the screen is way back here. I am going to be using the screen here though, so if you guys want to stand down or turn around.
Well, we can see over you.
Yeah. And I will project as loudly as I can.
You're not that tall, Ann.
So we were with you, I think it was just 2 weeks ago, and we were showing you where we were at in the site planning process. Other than a handful of folks at with each equity partner, so the city, with the Stock Show Association, and with CSU, you all are really the only ones who've seen this sort of sausage being made as far as evaluating alternatives to the baseline. And if you recall, the impetus for that is the rail move, right? So there was the idea of moving the rail, and it is actually in the baseline move over west, the west end. We can just jump into that and show you. So the rail in the baseline, and unlike in the master plan where it still is coming right through here, consolidated but coming through the center of the site, is moved over to National Western Drive. So that sort of prompted this thought about, well, you know, with that major of a change, does the overall site plan, you know, is it still the best thing as far as overall adjacencies, how people move through the space, access for the community, connections to the surrounding neighborhoods? And so we embarked on what has now been probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 week process. It feels longer in some ways, but it's been really good. In looking at an additional alternative that looked at the rail on this west edge. But there was also, in the master planning effort, some discussion of rail right along the BNSF. So if the Rock Island Railroad is consolidated, maybe it doesn't have to be over against National Western Drive. It could actually be along the BNSF Railroad. So you create, it's an impediment still for this east-west connectivity, but you're doing that once instead of twice. So we want to understand what that meant for the site. I think we communicated to you last time that we looked at well over 15 different options with all these different pieces. Fatally flawed some of those from an operational perspective. Some of it was the locations of the buildings that sort of resulted when you move the pieces. And so where we are today basically is a west option and an east option that are alternatives to the baseline. I think Eric articulated this last time. There's a process then to update the baseline if, in fact, all the partners agree, if the community members, you all, are weighing in on this as well. That needs to be adjusted. And that's probably a 6-week process of doing that. This will, and I have a next step slide at the end. This will be going to SteerCom on Monday. So they're evaluating with a lot of different information. So what we've done is gotten the site plan pretty well set for these alternatives, which frankly are boxes right now. So when we're talking about the reuse of some of the historic materials and things like that, we're really, really excited to get to that. But right now we're still moving some of the bigger puzzle pieces around. And so we have a West A option and a West B option. The only difference between A and B is what happens south of Betty Cram Drive. So south of here, and I can zoom in for everybody. There we go. There we go. So north of this, on the next drawing that I put up, is going to be exactly the same. So let me review that first. So this looks very much like what we presented 2 weeks ago. It looks very much like the master plan. The basically livestock complex in the southern portion of the site, just west of the BNSF. Equestrian complex just north of that. The master plan didn't quite work out the relationships with animal health. Didn't know fully what that program was going to be. CSU didn't know yet. And so this reflects that square footage for the animal health facility with CSU, as well as the equestrian vet component of that. Has a maintenance facility on the far north that's represented in the purple box. That's different than the existing baseline. So if nothing changes, if none of these alternatives are deemed to be as good or better than the baseline, well then the maintenance building is going to be constructed down here. It's reusing a warehouse building that exists today with some renovations. So in talking with the stock show folks, they have voiced some concerns about having to cross Betty Cram Drive, thinking about pedestrian connectivity through here, especially when they're using facilities on both sides during the build. And so they're concerned about then bringing trucks and whatever else is moving through here, front loaders and things. So that was one big change, was thinking about the maintenance up there. The other concern from CSU was actually, that both of their facilities in the baseline are in the north end of the site, up along Race. And with having a public face in a very kind of community-oriented aspect of their program regarding the Water Resources Center, they were hopeful that they could be maybe closer to the action. Where in later phases, we have the Colorado Commons here, where this is a very important connection between the neighborhoods and through the site. So the Water Resources Center located down here. The only difference in B, because there's a West A and a West B, is again what happens south of Betty Graham. And so if you look right here, we looked at another option where maybe the McConnell building is incorporated as an adaptive reuse into the Water Resource Center sort of situation there. So that's being evaluated by CSU. They're getting an opportunity to walk through that space and think about it. I think both have some interesting pros and cons. Adaptive reuse of a building is great, just as we were talking about historic structures. But this A option actually would bridge the road, perhaps. So you may actually have, it might just be sort of hallways and things, but actually going above the road, connecting the two sides of National Western Drive here, which could be a really interesting gateway experience, a really neat, iconic building right along Betty Cram, which is where we're seeing a lot of the opportunity for activation and community connection. We'll show you some thoughts that we had around that in response to Mickey's at our last meeting. So then east. This is the pan out. No one can really see that, so we'll zoom in. Here we have the rail kind of zipping up this way right along the BNSF. It creates that triangle to the north, if you recall, from our last meeting. Some of the adjustments that we've made on this are largely, as I pointed out, south of Betty Cram, and the east A and B are identical to west A and B, south of Betty Cram Drive. So we have this, sort of bridging the road configuration in A, and using the McConnell building in option B here. Other changes have really been about since 2 weeks ago, for those of you who saw the presentation then, and I can give a little overview for those folks who weren't here. But the adjustments have been pretty minor. It's been thinking about how many stalls are we fitting in the barns, and are those the right shape? Do we have access in the right places? Are there opportunities to create a public entrance that's really legible, or is it just, the entire building is kind of looking the same? And so those are some of the things that we've been thinking through. And so the adjustments are pretty slight. But the overview for you is that this would be stockyards, whereas in the west option, I'll zip back really quickly, stockyards is over here, basically between the Rock Island Railroad and then the two livestock and equestrian complexes here. I'll try not to use complex too much, but facilities here. And then, so you're seeing that up to the north. And so in those times when it's being used as parking outside a stock show, and times when it's used for a larger event like a concert or a movie, we think that this may actually work as well, at least, as the west configuration and baseline. And in some ways, it may be better because, and that really depends on the programming. How often is it used as parking? How often is it used for storage and things like that? Again, that's a big difference. In both configurations, we're showing structured parking now beneath the yard. So I don't know if people caught that in their last couple presentations, but largely because of the cost of cleaning up this site in the short term, it would definitely be something that's done eventually. Where those 1,000 parking spaces were going to be a structure here earlier, those are now under the yards in both configurations. Here in the east, and it would basically be here in the west option. Yeah, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Based on your configuration and what you're proposing here, based on the assumptions, how much of this going to be used as a livestock center? What percentage of the year is that going to be used as a livestock center? What percentage is going to be used for other activities? And based on that information, or based on those projections, how do you come up with the best configuration to meet those needs?
Yeah, so we are actually working with a team to delineate, there's the programming of the space that is largely the square footage of different types of space, how much restroom, circulation, all that. But there's also the programming, to your point, how much, when is it used for different purposes, right? So that's sort of the scheduling of the facilities. So we're actually working through that as part of our contract as well as, you know, how are these being used and what is the market reality of that. Some of it is, we can take a very good educated guess at, but a lot of the events that even use the facility today, the facility competes for those. They may call Visit Denver and say, oh, what kind of spaces are available in Denver for us to do different things. So we're doing our best job at articulating that. As far as livestock, it's probably limited to stock show for the most part. There could be one or two, maybe more other events. Equestrian, there's the SAG study, which was a precursor to all of this work, actually suggested that could be 40 to 50 weeks a year of equestrian events. So pretty heavily programmed on the equestrian side, and to the point where they're actually talking about maybe overflowing into some of the equestrian facilities or livestock facilities. But these are meant to be pretty multi-purpose spaces, hence their position in the plan, and you saw that they were the same in both east and west. So this arena would be, it's labeled livestock arena, but it could be used for all different types of events, community events. Similarly with the livestock hall, yes, there's a barn configuration for that, but it could be divided into 2, 3 multiple community event spaces as well.
Yeah, the intent with that space is that it could be an expo hall, a trade show hall, all those things, and it's just, again, we're doing a couple of things. We're calling inputter interviews. So we're interviewing, you know, Aramarks and Kroenke and the Visit Denver, all these folks that run these big venues. And we're asking questions like, so what can't you do in yours that you think might be a market here?
Yeah, but
or what shows do you turn away? So we're looking at that. But we want to have as much use in these buildings 365 days a year as possible.
I understand that, but the big thing, or the new big push, and Chance, correct me if I'm wrong on this, was this really cool, super cool equestrian center that was going to, from my perspective, was going to have this world pristine draw. And that's what was, you know, that's why CSU really got involved, to really push this world equestrian center. But obviously, you know, and you know, CSU's thing is, you know, they want to feed the world, along with the agricultural thing right behind it. I see that just taking off and having a bigger percentage of use of the facility, which obviously they want to draw in more dollars, $3, $4 in the community. But given that type of forecasting, you would think that you'd want to design something that keeps all of that into context. And I don't see that. But go ahead, keep going, just because I don't see it as a kind of.
Well, I think you're bringing up a great point. There's a lot of things that aren't there yet also. So the context will be set once we really hone in on, you know, if one of these alternatives moves forward. We would do the same thing for the baseline if that's in fact what moves forward, is starting to create then those interstitial spaces kind of between the buildings and all those things. We actually think that this equestrian arrangement in the east alignment gives it a pretty prominent place on the site. Also creates structure, which I understand we've been kind of grappling with ourselves, creates structure closer to the river, which is great for programming and activation if we have 50 weeks a year of, you know, equestrian events going on here. There's a lot of coming and going. There's also security concerns with that. We don't want to block off the river in a new way, right? Like it's a big deal, is engaging the river. So we're sort of working through that, and I have some diagrams that show some ideas on that as well. But just to round out the overview of this, so animal health in this configuration is down towards along Betty Cram Drive, which CSU is a fan of, and they, you know, we're working with them to make sure that all options work for all equity partners. But they like this because of their facilities are co-located. They can have faculty and staff move back and forth. They can share some resources and things like that. They also, you know, I think there's a lot of signs pointing to Betty Cram Drive, not the lady sitting over there in the chair. Betty Graham Drive being a very active, prominent street, a connection for the community to and through the site. And so they like the idea of that prominent location on there. Similarly, the Legacy building that Stock Show is planning would be a Betty Graham in both scenarios as well. But this is interesting in a lot of different regards. One is that those are probably the higher design buildings on the site. So that creates some good opportunities there. It also creates some challenges when it comes to phasing and constructability. So we're working as a larger team to figure those out and see if this is in fact feasible. Yeah.
Is there any advantage one to the other for accessibility to the site? So like walking from the train station or
we'll come back to those others. Community connections. Here we go. So we did an overlay, and it's an early draft, and we'll have to work through this, and there's going to be tweaks to the plan to improve this, but basically this was sort of an evaluation of each from a community connection standpoint. So in the west configuration, and this would apply to the baseline for the most part as well, we have two rails. So the existing BNSF, and then a consolidated Rock Island Railroad over to the west here. So there would be basically two pedestrian bridges. The station would be right here. So pedestrian bridge crossing the BNSF would drop you into the site. And so we would actually, what we're showing in purple there is we want to design that as a very public-friendly plaza space to move through. It would also have to support loading, unloading of semis and things like that, but design that in a way that it feels very welcoming and feels like a community connector. Another pedestrian bridge across the Rock Island Railroad, consolidated right there, and then connecting across the 51st. So the bridge alignment, the 51st, would be kind of mid-site. That's something I didn't point out. When we look at the east option, and I'll come back to this one in just a second. But when you look at the east option, the roadway configuration is quite different too. So then we highlighted also some of the other plaza opportunities. There's plenty in here, but we tried to basically identify some of the larger plazas. So down here by the Legacy building at the end of the stockyards and sort of adjacent to the Water Resource Center, there'd be an opportunity maybe on multiple corners, but a large plaza space here. And then in the latter phases further out, obviously the larger plazas, and that's not even identifying all of them. We think that the kind of community-facing uses, community-facing facilities, would have a concentration here, again in later phases, in phase 1 and 2, near the intersection of National Western, which would still be coming up through the middle of the site and cutting over and heading up. So this location here, and then up on the north with the animal health facility. And then obviously all the connections that we're trying to make with the roadway, improving those roadway connections, Brighton being the first kind of out of the gate in that respect. And then the riverfront, obviously. The trade-off with this option has great visibility of the riverfront, and actually has a roadway connection, right, like right along the riverfront. But it also has, two fences and a rail. So that's a trade-off there, and I'll admit there's not a perfect option here. In the east option, we actually consolidate all that rail, all that fencing over here, but then you end up, we've chosen to move the road here because of space constraints, also the idea of really orienting the buildings to each other, creating a kind of a festival event street here. But then there's obviously, as I said, you don't have that visibility of the river as easily, so we'd have to think about how do we get people down to the river space, to the riverfront. We've been, and I have some photos at the tail end here, thinking about maybe more natural environment, having some plaza event type spaces, but connecting that with boardwalks, interpretive features, things like that.
Jay, Dave's got a question.
Yeah,
Hold on, John. Dave's had his hand up for a while.
We're running out of time with the holidays and the National Western, but is there still time to take a 2-hour bus ride to really get the feel of this?
Between now and Monday, when SteerCom's voting?
No, it would be now in the end of January is when we have to do it, or want to do it.
I think we could do it after stock show.
I'm just, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
'cause
Okay.
we're seeing that, but I think we need to get the feel of it.
I think that's a good idea, Dave.
We're working on some renderings too. There's a pretty big push getting a lot of data and things together for the SteerCom discussion on Monday. But we're working on some, I have a guy working on that actually. There's the Google glasses actually, where you put your phone in a piece of cardboard. It's pretty neat. But yes, I would advise you to get out on the site again and get a sense of the scale of some of these spaces. It's always amazing to me, and basically from Betty Cram to Race is about a half a mile, right? So that scale is difficult to grasp when you're looking at a slide like this.
So we will make a effort right after stock show to put something together. Vern?
I have a question. In this situation here, in all the different things that you're proposing here, how does this compare to the top 5 places that are putting together the same kind of show and situation? How does this rank with those?
What do you mean, like Tulsa and Oklahoma City?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
It's, all those places are so very different from this.
Yeah.
This is a true urban location. And, you know, like you go to San Antonio and it is surrounded by 5,000 parking spaces. You know, we don't have a site like that. And most of the places that are being designed, or are designed, have these massive parking lots next to them. That's not what we want to do here. We need parking, but that's not what we want to do. So, from for instance, the equestrian arena, it's not the biggest. You know, we're not bringing in the 3,000, you know, horse Arabian show. Now, we might be able to do that on site with things, but it's not going to happen at this location every year. That's not the thing. We're looking for that 1,500 horse show. So again, we're trying to fit a market of other places too. So, I don't know, does that help? I mean, back in the master plan, we looked at a number of different places. Kansas City, Oklahoma City, Louisville, and then Houston and San Antonio. So
the other reality of life, though, is, to be fair, and this is part of the, you know, we talked about this in 2C, is incentive funds. Tulsa and Oklahoma City incentivize these horse shows to come to their cities, big time. So, I mean, our joke is among the equestrian folks at Stock Show is, where would you rather be in August? Tulsa or Denver, right? I mean, let's face it. But that in itself won't get some of the big landmark. I mean, Tulsa and Oklahoma City already know what we're doing, and they're trying to get their game up, right? Because they know that we're running around the corner. But I think Eric's right. There's a lot of different factors. You know what we'll do is we'll have Paul.
I think I still have that presentation from way back in the master plan.
But we ought to have Paul, because there's some also additional information.
Yep.
Paul obviously is, you know, won't be around until after stock show, right? But we ought to have him address some of those issues and what the factors are, because it's a combination of things, you know.
Because one of the things with Tulsa and Oklahoma City is that, and some of these other places, is that they're exclusively horse facilities.
Right.
I mean, that's what they do, and we're different.
We're a
beast
livestock.
here. We're livestock. We're horses. We're Western culture writ large, and also when you look at the amenities surrounding Tulsa, Oklahoma City, they just can't match what we do here. And so there's some attraction, and we already have horse shows who are down the line when we build this place are already looking at us, because there's something different about Denver as opposed to going to Tulsa or going to Oklahoma. It's the same thing. I don't know how many of you know about the National Falmouth Rodeo, which is on its 7th night on its 10-night run. It's the Super Bowl of rodeos in Vegas right now. Folks tried to move it. They were looking at moving into somewhere in Florida. It previously had been in Oklahoma City,
Orlando,
for 30 or 40 years before it moved to Vegas for the last 25 or 30 years. And one of the reasons it moved to Vegas is because the cowboys and cowgirls and folks who are Western enthusiasts wanted to have something different than being in Dallas. or Fort Worth or Oklahoma or somewhere in Oklahoma. They wanted to go to Vegas. And one of the things that's attractive about Denver, we're a western city, but we also offer something that you can't get if you're in Tulsa. I mean, Lord knows you don't want to, hang out in Tulsa too much, but that's just my personal opinion.
Now, what about Gaylord out in Aurora? Is that gonna hurt us at all?
They're different things.
Carrie, you want to take that on as Visit Denver?
It'll help you out a lot.
They're a 1,500 room hotel with a very large meeting and conference space, so they don't have the capacity to hold like a livestock show or a horse show. But are they competing with the convention center? Absolutely.
But
Richard,
they're going to run out of water in 3 years.
Richard will tell you that they've already made a dent to about 25 or 30% of the conventions, and they're poaching. So yeah, I mean, the one thing they can control is room block cost. And Richard and those guys have to piecemeal downtown hotels and all these other stuff. So yeah, it's going to have an impact.
And everybody likes the new thing, right? Which works to the advantage of National Western Center. It's going to be the new event space for these types of things. So it's going to attract people that want to come here and experience it for the very first time. So that has a lot going for it.
And I'm not a Gaylord hater by any stretch of the imagination. I've been to a few Gaylords for different conferences. I will say this: once you go to a Gaylord, I don't really want to go to another one, because it's one of those things where you go there once, it's kind of like Disney, and you've seen it. You've been there, done that. Like the one in Nashville, there's a big river running through the friggin' thing. How many times can you see a river running through a friggin' hotel? Once you see it once, you're like, oh, cool. And then you move on.
I mean, their whole model is to keep you captive. They don't want people coming to downtown Denver.
I would say actually that's one of the things that differentiates this National Western Center is the context. So to Eric's point, there isn't context in a lot of those other places. There's in the middle of nowhere, there's large parking lots surrounding them. They don't have historic structures that can be adapted or used on site. They don't have the water tower and the history. And they don't have the neighborhoods right there, and both the existing sort of state of those as well as what's articulated in the neighborhood plan. And so I think that's what we're trying to, that's why that last slide, those connections to the neighborhood are so important. Because that's something that no other center can have of this type.
So what you're selling basically is a niche, okay? What Denver's draw is the niche of, I guess other people may call it other different things. There's downtown Denver, there's skiing, there's this, there's that there. So it's not so much facility itself than it is the other things that can be done around it.
It'll be a very good facilities that'll be new, so that'll be attractive, but you're right, it's also about what's
but Vern, I would also say that none of these other events, I mean, I think the footprint of CSU is really huge. The bottom line is CSU is an equine. If you are in the horse business, you know about Colorado State University. So the fact that you could bring your horse show here, and even though some of those people will travel with their own vets and stuff like that, because whatever, but the fact that they've got the research, the ability, the capacity of CSU, both in, whether it's water or whatever. So it's more than just, I mean, it's the combination of all these components, right? Visit Denver has talked about, we are getting the outdoor retailer conference for 10, we took it away from Salt Lake, right? They're actually headquartered in Colorado, but they always had their conference in Salt Lake, drove John Hickenlooper crazy. And so they're coming here. Our hope is that at some point, as the outdoor retailer comes out, and there's actually two conferences, the independent retailers,
Then they merge.
and then and then the other ones, right, Carrie? And they come in here, that they would use that facility, okay, to be able to showcase, particularly once the river has access to the river and be able to do some things. The hope is that you would get more shows. So it's a multitude of
And the way I like to explain this, Vern, is if you've seen the latest iPhone commercial versus the latest Samsung commercial, and you have the iPhone commercial with the folks dancing through the streets with the wireless headphones on, the iPhone has the latest and greatest technology, but what they're really selling is an experience, which is why I think iPhone will always beat Samsung, even though Samsung may be a slightly better phone. But Samsung always sells, well, look at our great technology. And the truth of the matter is, at the end of the day, most people want to be sold on an experience. They want to feel like they're a part of something. And what we're doing here is creating an environment where we have the best and the brightest of CSU and ag education and everything else, but we also sell an experience that when you come away from here, you've experienced something phenomenal that you won't forget, that keeps bringing you back over and over again.
And it's authentic experience.
It's authentic experience.
Not Disney-esque experience.
It's not going to be like when they rebuilt downtown Warsaw after World War II, they rebuilt all the buildings, but it feels like you're in friggin' Disneyland.
So there's some really great discussion of this coming out of the Regional Tourism Act documentation. I think there was some, I think it may not answer it directly, but it sort of solidifies a lot of what people are saying to me listening to this. And there was a market, wasn't there a market study prior to? These are really great comprehensive documents that I think go to what you're asking for. And some of it has to do with capacity and the cluster capacities of different things. And I think that was part of what the strength was going into this formation of the project, and then 2C, and then getting the other streams of revenue. There was a real competitive study done on all these fronts, and I think that it's kind of the best is yet to come with imagining some of this. So I would just maybe make sure we have access to those. They're probably already up there. Are they already on the? And they're posted somewhere. Maybe at nevergov.org.
Yeah,
or somewhere.
Yeah, they are.
Well, you know, the last of my comment here is the thing that I'm concerned with is with every change that you make, there's a drop. You move your business from one place to another, okay, you lose a percentage of your business because you've made that move. You're going to change this entire site, and I've been here forever, just like most people in this room. And I remember how the site is. People come in here and they sleep right with their horses, they sleep with their cattle. All that stuff's going to go away. Accessibility for the people that are actually putting the shows on and doing this. This is going to be an issue for them. This is going to change drastically. And you are going to take a hit on that. And it really concerns me once we start making all these changes, and I'm all for it. I mean, you know, yeah, let's move forward. But I really am concerned when you have these ranchers and these people out here that the frills, they're here for the animals. They don't give a shit about the rest of that stuff. They don't care about Denver or all the rest of it. They're here for that. And when you make it harder and more expensive for them to come out here and be a part of this show, you're going to lose a certain amount of them people. And it really does concern me on that.
Paul, I wish Paul was here. I mean, he gets so many complaints every year about the quality of these facilities.
Right.
I mean, if you show livestock in the barn in the basement of this building, you are not a happy camper, but you still come because it's the stock show.
Well, and their staff gets sick. I mean, they literally, stock show staff is literally super sick by the time stock show's over.
I mean, they take these big horse pills to fight back against the allergies, and I'm going to play my best.
No,
Paul
seriously.
Andrews. They really do. And I would do my best Paul Andrews. Paul will tell you that the site plans that are up here drastically improve the accessibility for our exhibitors, for egress and ingress, access to their livestock, et cetera, et cetera. And I personally don't think it's going to change who sleeps with their animals or not, because the truth of the matter is when you have all these animals here, most of the time folks do stay, and they're going to keep doing that because these are high-value animals in the livestock show, and they take care of them 24/7. It's not going to change how they relate. And I wish you could come up here with me during a stock show and sit in a club with me, and folks come to me all the time and say, Terrence, you all need to do something about this place because it's just not.
But
really
I think,
I hope my
for,
concern is wrong.
No, I think your concerns, I'll tell you what Paul will tell you where he thinks the danger will be in stock show is in construction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and what they're trying to do starting this year, and you know, to Eric's point, I wish Paul was here, they're taking some of their top exhibitors and sort of educating them on what's coming, okay, so that they know that. One of the most interesting reads, and maybe we'll get it out, the SAG's report when it was done, actually did a survey of exhibitors to the stock show. If you read what these guys say, what they will tell you is it is the worst facility in the country, but we have to be here because they're the Super Bowl of livestock. And if we don't show in Denver, we lose an enormous amount of business someplace else, right? Or, or having that kind of piece and be able to do that. But they will tell, I mean, they come because they have to, because you're in the business, right? You have to show, you have to do that. But I think where Paul is also very worried about is in the phasing of construction, because they can't shut it down. We can't if we shut down the stock show 1 year, we're done, right? It's over, right? Is how do you make sure that we handhold all the exhibitors through this process to say it's going to get better and that they have to start seeing improvements in the next 2 or 3 years. That's probably where Paul will tell you is the biggest risk. Because every year it's going to be different, right? So you have to change the thing until it gets settled down. So it's all very good thoughts though, Vern, because I think these are all very important. But this whole site stuff is really important as to where this thing settles out.
We've been working with Stock Show nearly daily on thinking
calls.
through the operations and function, the maintenance, how it works during Stock Show, outside of Stock Show, tapping into their knowledge of all other types of events, like the county fair that was, the inaugural year last year. And we're working through that phasing piece of it right now. So it is a part of the evaluation. Is not just, how is it different when phase 1 and 2 is complete from today, but also what is every stock show like, and are we fully operational?
So the shows that are outside the stock show that involve livestock, like the alpaca shows and stuff, where are those facilities now? I mean,
where are they going to be?
Yeah, where are they?
I mean, currently?
No, we're in the new configuration.
Like the alpaca show during the stock show?
Wasn't there one? Aren't there stock?
If there are, okay, so if it's at the stock show now, it will be at the new stock show. Okay.
Yeah, I thought there were some outside.
And if there are outside, Paul will still bring those shows here, and we have some of the best facilities in the world now to do those shows. So again, we're trying to bring as many things in here as possible throughout the year.
It's likely in the livestock hall and arena because of how heavily we think the equestrian complex will be programmed.
Like we have a new thing this year coming to the stock show, livestock show. Never before been here. We have a new livestock coming in this year, a Brazilian breed of cattle that's not a meat, not one that you eat for meat. It's all show. They're mini cebus. They're little. They're mini cebus. They're about this big, and they have big horns. Yeah.
If you don't eat them, what the hell do you do with them?
They're just purely for show.
It's like a show dog.
It's like a trophy cow.
Oh wow!
Coming to a backyard near you soon.
You don't eat it. It's just for like looking at it and going, ooh, impressive.
So there's one thing about, before you finish, it's kind of like a loose end conversation that comes up and goes away regarding possible residential premises on the footprint, and I'd kind of like to see where that stands. I mean, it can go all the way from residential caretakers to, are there forms of housing that can be incorporated, all the way from students to, things that would be available. That's something that kind of we dip into and dip out of, and where does that figure in the conversation?
Well, the framework agreement has very specific language about housing. It was a long, contentious battle for some of us who were in the room. And the way it reads now, because keep in mind this includes the Coliseum site, right? That it is contemplated at some point that there may be short-term housing, i.e. a hotel, short-term housing that would include professors and students or whatever, so that's sort of perfectly allowed. I think anything beyond that, and I don't have the framework agreement in front of me, precise language, the issue is the environmental cleanup. Environmental cleanup.
Okay.
That you can't, the Coliseum is a super, it's a super fun site, right? You can't, nobody knows how much until you start digging into it. I mean, I think we have some ideas, but what you were going to have to do actual residential standards
So it's the same covenant problem we had up with the Sarco?
I don't think it is as bad as that because the Sarco covenanted themselves because they were the end polluter, right? That is not the case here. And in the framework agreement, it was very clear the city and county of Denver will not be responsible for the environmental cleanup of that. So whoever brings in a project is going to have to calculate. And that's the issue with the DPS site.
Yes.
The issue with the DPS site, for example, is that it's heavily contaminated. Anywhere between $19 to $26 million of cleanup, environmental cleanup. We don't know precisely, right? But those are the issues, and the city will not take program dollars to do that. You have to take it from someplace else.
So, Maria, didn't we also address residential with zoning?
It is allowed.
It's allowed. When you go back to the master plan, we worked, of course, in tandem with the Global and Elyria neighborhood plan. When we talked about housing on this site, the discussion was, we want that housing in the neighborhoods. We don't necessarily want it here. So we didn't have any here because we want to see that, between Washington and the river and around the TOD in Elyria, and not draw from that. Plus, we have a very tight site. We have got a lot of things that we have to do here, and there isn't an overabundance of more space for residential.
But
the other discussion we've had is, do you want to live next to a rock concert every weekend or some big event?
Okay, but Eric, let me. I understand that, and that's the discussion that was the master plan. Let me be perfectly clear on behalf of two equity partners. We signed an agreement that's for 100 fucking years, okay? And nobody thought that you'd leave next to a goddamn consolidated main line 30 years ago when we started cleaning up the Central Platte Valley. So CSU and the stock show felt very strongly, excuse my French for using the F word, but the bottom line is that
it's on
it was a very heated discussion. Trust me, this was very heated discussion.
Right now.
I'm reliving it right now. Okay, is to be that short-sighted to actually limit a use that could be potentially useful at some point down the road, I think would have been irresponsible on our part, particularly when you're signing a 100-year agreement, which we did. So that's the issue. So Eric, no offense, no, not climbing down you. So yeah, we could also actually, and talk about living next to a rock center. Staples Center has condominiums on top of it in their hotel. The Chinese are building 2,500 housing units across the street for Staples Center. So people can't sit there and tell me that people don't want to leave near these sites. I think housing is needed. We don't know what it looks like. We have to build the site first, but it's allowed. And I will now shut up.
Don't throw your shoe down.
I have to put my shoe back on.
She took her shoe off.
Well, right.
I'm like, she took her shoe.
Well, I had a cortisone shot on my foot. I had to take my shoe off.
Eric, I just want to interject a part of it. As you summarize.
No offense, Eric.
I really appreciate, Maria, you taking the opportunity to put that on the table like that. Because as you summarized the conversation, what we talked about, I have a different recollection from being part of this. The lines were not that hard in the conversations. And I just want to be fair that I think that there's always been a kind of a desire to explore what those possibilities are. And that's part of what we need to be careful of, is not to default to, a point of view that's more restrictive than the unresolved conversation was, which still has potentials in it. So,
there'll be stuff unresolved here for 10 more years.
So, and that's the way it should be. That's, I think, part of what is accomplished by making sure it's on the table. And who knows, once we get to electric trains and everybody's wearing their virtual reality things and there's no music in the air and everybody's just dancing around, maybe it'll be the perfect place to live.
Wow. So we're rapidly running out of time.
I rest my case.
Like 5 more slides, I think.
Okay, so we're going to let Jay run through his next 5 slides.
So one of the major things that we are embarking on, this is, if you've noticed our rhythm, we try to give you a little preview of where we're going next. So whatever, whether it's just the baseline or the baseline plus an alternative, if we're wherever we're at, we need to start thinking about the riverfront. I think you all reminded us last time about how important that was to the voters, to the community. And so we're beginning to look at different precedents in different places, thinking about different ways to interact with that space. There will be a lot of sort of natural habitat and water quality that's necessary if you think about how large this site is and the way that water flows across the site. But how do we create then opportunities for interaction with that space? Interpretation and education will be a major component of that. CSUs, as especially excited about that, but I think there's opportunities to roll in some of our other partners as well.
I've seen them in the car.
And then are there opportunities, and this is a pretty urban example here, but in addition to the sheep ridge, which we also think is amazing and should be part of that riverfront experience, are there opportunities to where we're not necessarily touching the water, touching habitat restoration, things like that, but introduce some art and things like that. So that not that this is necessarily the piece that would hang over the plat, but can we explore some interesting art interpretations in the space as well? So our next steps would be we have riverfront alternatives development, engaging the community on that. Julia talked about the survey, which will be updating a little intro piece, as well as the community event that will be coming out in early February. And then we're refining refinements to the site plans and overlays will be presented at SteerCom on Monday. So the next time we see you, we'll have a refined set. And again, I'm not sure if it's at 1, is it 2, is it 3?
SteerCom
but we'll have a refined set of alternatives.
Would you just define SteerCom? Because a couple people just said, what is SteerCom?
Can someone else define that for me?
So SteerCom is in the framework agreement, and it has oversight of the capital build program. It has representatives from WSSA, CSU, and the city on it, and they make effectively programmatic decisions on what contracts we let, when we can spend money. So you have 3 partners there that have put in money: the city on behalf of the residents of Denver, CSU, and WSSA, and they're the governance over the program. And what they're looking at on Monday, these are all really great alternatives. We do have to kind of get going with the bill. That's the one truism that we can afford a project that is done quickly. If it takes a long time, you run out of money with escalation and inflation. So we have to kind of move forward. Plus, we've all been talking about it for a long time. And so SteerCom on Monday is going to evaluate these alternatives to see if there are fatal flaws in construction, sequencing, or operations, where there would be such a bad experience at the stock show that no one would ever come back. If it's constructible, if we can maintain reasonable access to the site, all those sorts of things. So those are kind of operational questions. And then there's a secondary question on whether or not they cost more. There's no more money. So if there's additional cost, how's that being paid for? And so on Monday, they're looking at east and west.
Okay.
And if either one of those gets a veto, basically an operational veto or a cost veto that just is insurmountable, we have baseline, which we can build on the schedule and within the budget that we promised you. And so this is a brief, before we spend all this money and kind of lock into a site plan. It was a really good idea to take one last look at, do we have the right layout, is there a better way, but the clock is still ticking. So they're making a decision on Monday. If either one of those passes through that screen and it's not a huge operational impact or we can work around it, and we think there's a way to pay for it, we have till January to answer those 2 questions. Definitively, how are you going to pay for it, and how are you going to build it? That is the end, and then you will know the big blocks, as Jay said, of where the buildings are going, and we can get into what goes on in the buildings.
So between the buildings and the reuse of historic pieces, that sort of thing. Yeah.
I want to get back to the river. I want to emphasize, last night we had the final public hearing on the now Carpio Sanguinet Park that's directly across the one river crossing.
Yes, the 51st Street connection.
Yes.
Yes.
And in that projected plan, we do have it coming down to the river on the western bank. So whatever takes place should complement each other and not bump heads there. So
absolutely. Yeah, we've been tracking along with that process and with the design team.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
Absolutely.
You're in tune then with Parks and Recreation, what they're doing, yeah.
Yep.
Because we got, I'm not at the Rio Grande, but on both sides of the river here.
Hey,
Only
you know-
John could say that.
Yeah. Well, Larry Burgess is not here. He'd jump all over me for saying that. But it's important. The river is a big part. I'm not as eloquent as Mickey Zeppelin, and I thought he did a tremendous job last night in speaking to the issue of the cultural, the historical impact of the entire industry impact that we've had in this neighborhood. And it's got to be integrated in that and reflected in whatever we do. So I'm glad to hear that you're in time with that. Thank you very much.
Can I clarify one thing? We always call that the cattle bridge, not the sheep bridge.
Yeah.
But it would be.
Okay,
It's called the sheep bridge in all our historic documents.
Yeah, because
Oh, it's behind the sheep barn. That's
right,
what it is.
it's by La Bouton, yeah.
But it was
So-
a cattle bridge.
And more sheep we used it than cattle, actually.
There you go.
Because we used to do 3,500 at Wilson and Company in a 10-hour day. 6 days a week. That's a
Can I
lot. That's a
offer
lot.
one just business item?
Okay, thank you, Jay. We appreciate it. Liz has a final business item.
Just one quick business item, just watch your emails. We may or may not be here at the National Western for our January meeting. You know, last year we did it, but there was a lot going on, It was just after Stock Show. The year before, I think we did it at Focus Points. So we'll just keep an eye out as to where the location of our January meeting will be, okay?
Is there any public comment? Seeing none, thank you, everybody, for
Now,
coming.
wait. Will you guys take food home, please? Whatever's left, you can take whatever you want. We've got little brown.
There are little carry-out containers there.
Containers.
So help yourself.
And just real quick, every year I speak to the aspect of the Dalgany Interceptor here. So I'd like to go on record one more time about the Dalgany Interceptor issues. Okay, being next to the river on the west side, okay, the evening odors along that interceptor have gotten increasingly worse. And this is an issue that I've asked the people that are handling the design for over here to address with Metro Wastewater on what to do about dealing with the odor here. You're going to build a $1.5 billion facility here, and literally it smells absolutely awful once it gets around between 5 and 12 o'clock at night. It's absolutely terrible. So I would like them to maybe us have a meeting with Metro Wastewater and let's find out what they're going to do about it, because if we don't start dealing with this here soon, it's going to take a long time for them to make adjustments and to deal with this odor issue, and it needs to be dealt with.
As part of the relocation discussion we're having with Metro on Dalgany, they're looking at an odor control system that would include at the same time.
Okay, I would like them to come and present that to us, please.
Okay.
Dave?
Thank you.
Now, before we start digging, I've never seen one, but can we somehow design a commemorative belt buckle, like 1909? I don't know, it's just, I would love to have a belt buckle from National Western. I don't know if they've ever had one. But,
We'll ask.
just something commemorative.
Okay.
Put
We'll
on the
do that.
calls list, yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Well, you guys please take dessert, food, whatever's left, take it home.